Welcome everyone to this new VoxelVision tutorial, and in this video we're gonna create custom terrain, and I will show you a few different methods how you can create, customize and export terrain directly to Minecraft. So I would say we jump right into it. Since the last time I worked on a new update for VoxelVision, version 4.1, so make sure you're using this when you're following this tutorial, because I'm using some new settings that I've implemented in version 4.1. So make sure you're using the version as well. And one thing to note is that version 4.1 is exclusive to the new Blender version 5.2. So I'm using the Blender version 5.2.0 LTS version. LTS is short for long-term support. So make sure you're using 5.2 as your version if you want to follow along with this tutorial, or if you want to use the new VoxelVision update 4.1. So the first thing that I'm going to do is to open up the asset browser. As the last time, I'm choosing the VoxelVision asset library, and we are seeing all of those different assets right here. The other thing that I'm going to do is delete the scene objects, and in the bottom left corner you can see all the shortcuts and keys that I'm pressing, so you can follow along. If I forget to explain something in more detail, you can see which shortcuts I was pressing. Let's open up the VoxelVision panel as well. You can see I'm using the version 4.1. So the first method that we're going to discuss is modeling terrain by hand, basically. So there are a few different methods. You could either drag and drop the simple terrain into your viewport, just like this. And then you can go into shading mode. You can do this with Z. Then it will open this little pie menu, and you can choose material preview to see all those textures. And then you can go from here, basically. I am assuming you watched the previous tutorials about mask and all the other settings of the normal VoxelVision geometry node modifier. So I will speed up the work a little bit in this tutorial so you're not getting bored. And yeah. Let's just check in the simple terrain masking for the blocks, so we get rid of some ugly blocks over here, and then this looks pretty good. But what if you want to really make it your own? So let's open up the terrain modifiers on the right. So in this case, let's just use the terrain modifier, and you can see it creates some swirls, some more strength to it. So if I disable like all the stuff this modifier does, you can see we are actually working with basic geometry, just like this. So if I remove this, you can see, okay, if I turn it back on, this is actually what it would convert if we wouldn't apply any like magic to it, or like any other details that we can control with the terrain modifier. So if I apply some subdivisions, I basically increase the faces. As you can see, if I disable this, you can see I introduce more or less polygons, and this way you can displace and modify your terrain in a more defined manner. So let's preview this terrain, and then you can play with the strength, make it bigger, make it smaller to increase some detail. But this is like more of a solution that you can apply at the end. So optimally, you would basically model the terrain exactly how you would like it in the end. So let's do this. Let's hide, go out of preview, and let's hide all those modifiers. So we are left with this terrain. If you could either work with this terrain, or you can choose a new terrain from scratch. So that's what we are gonna use. So we are just delete the mesh, and we can create a new mesh from plane. I recommend you can go into the item of the N panel. It's called N because you can open and close it by pressing the N key on your keyboard. And then you can scale it up. Let's make a 200 by 200 terrain. Maybe something like this. And in this first part, we are covering some different methods how you can create the terrain itself. And in the end of the video, I cover some customization options, how you can improve it with trees, rocks, maskings, and gradients to make it really special to your different needs. So how can you work with this now? this is 200 by 200. Let's apply the scale, and then we're gonna subdivide it. So right click, subdivide, and then you can choose on the bottom and increase the numbers of cuts. So you get a lot of geometry, and then you can just work with it. So for example, yeah, you can go into edit mode and choose some faces, and you could either drag them up like this, or you can work with the proportional editing tool on this button right here. You can also enable and disable it by pressing O, and then you can choose like different fall off modes. For example, if you choose random and take like this random, and you can scroll with your mouse wheel, you can see you get something. Some random faces will or points will basically rise up as well, which could build up your terrain. So for example, if I do this, and if we then want to convert it, so this is like a bit of an extreme version, but you could then go in and say, okay, let's apply our terrain gen, and let's preview the color. It looks like this. And then you can drag and drop the VoxelVision geometry node modifier onto it, and it will automatically convert into the terrain. And then we can obviously go back to our VoxelVision geometry modifier, choose the simple terrain as our base, apply the mask, and disable slabs and stairs. And then you're left with like this beautiful rugged terrain actually in a matter of seconds. So this is one method. Obviously, not everyone needs a rugged terrain like this. So let's go back and remove our plane. I removed the plane in edit mode, so I can just reiterate on top of it. So for example, if we make it like this, we can also subdivide it again, choose the proportional editing again, and for example, choose sphere. And then we can basically go in, let's scale it up a bit, subdivide even more. And then we can go in and select different kinds of points, use the proportional editing, and then you, for example, get like this, which is pretty cool. So you could do like little hills. You could also choose a different, for example, smooth, then it's more of a hilly side. And I mean, this is pretty stupid, quote unquote, but this is like the base that you can work on. So you could also select multiple faces. Let's go into face mode actually. And then go in and start extruding from here. And just work your way up. So I disable proportional editing. Work your way up from side view, E, extrude, scale, rotate. And then you can build up your terrain like this. If you want like some cool spikes, so you can also do this, press E, extrude. And then if you enable the modifier once more, you can see it directly applies it onto your mesh. So you can sculpt and edit it directly as you want with this hands-on method, basically. This is like the ideal version that you could perform it. If we remove this again and drag in the simple terrain, you can see this is built off from smaller pieces as well. And then you can basically also select, if you go into edge select mode, you can then hold Alt to select the edge loop, press E and S, and basically scale it to get like a little plain, the grass plains biome with a mountain on top. And then you can go from here. So this is the modeling solution that you could use to create your own custom terrain. The next thing that we're gonna explore is using Heightmaps. Heightmaps are basically black and white textures that describe the displacement of a plane. So how can you work with such a texture? Heightmaps, I would recommend you using geometry nodes for it. So we're gonna create a plane. This plane automatically, if you create it from the Shift A menu, automatically has a UV texture. You can check it if you go into the properties and then UV maps. It has a UV map called UV map. And we can use this UV map to apply the texture in the geometry node tab. So I'm actually gonna go into the shading mode first so you can actually see how it looks. And I'm gonna drag in the height map from the Windows Explorer. So you can just drag and drop it, or you can click on open and open the texture directly. And let's plug in this height map that I just got. So this is how a height map looks like, black and white. And now we want to displace it. And we can do this in geometry nodes. You can go over to the geometry nodes workspace, and then you have like those nodes. And this is actually what powers VoxelVision entirely. So don't be afraid, nodes are nodes, but it's very simple, I promise. So let's bring in our texture once more. So this is our texture, and we need a vector, and this vector is actually our UV map. So you can search for a named attribute, and then click on this name field, and it will pop right up, UV map. Connect the socket, purple to purple, and you're good to go. So if you then view this, you should, in theory, see what's going on. But you need some vertices. So you could either subdivide it like this, or you can introduce subdivision on our mesh by using the subdivide mesh option. So if we subdivide and now view our texture, you can see with every subdivision, it will get more and more detailed. So if I go to 7 or 8, you can see it now gets really detailed. And you can check how big the size is. So let's do 150 maybe. Apply the scale as always. And then we need to displace it actually. So how are we going to do this? We use a set position node, set position. And then we want to offset our grid or our plane points by the color. And if we do this, nothing really happened. This is because the value is very, very small on the scale. So we use a vector math node called scale. And with this, you can basically scale up our displacement. But somehow it looks wrong. And this is because we are offsetting or displacing our texture on all axes. So we're going to use a combine XYZ node to isolate the axis that we're going to displace it on. And this is the Z axis, so just the vertical axis. And now you can see if I decrease our vertices or our subdivisions, you can see it gets more and more detailed or less and less detailed. So let's make it maybe, if you go into this dimension view, you can see it 60 meters height for the mountain. So if we increase this, we can go up to 100. So you can also type in 100 and then it's perfectly 100. And then you can continue working with this mesh as the following. You can use any texture, and this is like the great example because if you go back, you can also use procedural textures. For example, Blender has built-in textures, for example, the Voronoi texture. And you can basically plug it in just like this. And then you get this texture, which you can even customize just like this. Obviously, our shader is a bit broken, but you can see in which direction I'm going. So for now, let's use the height map to demonstrate, but we will definitely go back to the first idea that we had just now. So we can go back into this mode, preview our color, preview our terrain on top of it. And in this case, I don't really like that our terrain modifier is actually displacing our mountain. So let's return this to 0 and disable the subdivision. And then you can choose the VoxelVision geometry node modifier and drag and drop it onto it. Let's disable stairs and slabs again, scroll down and get the simple terrain block palette, and you're good to go. So this is basically instantly your terrain with the custom block palette. Maybe you want to make it a bit more not pretty with a bit of custom noise. Let's make it a bit smaller, something like this. Distortion, detail, something like this. It breaks up the pattern basically. So this is before, this is after. Basically makes it a bit more, or it introduces some noise basically. You can obviously go in and change like the complete block palette. So you can also say, okay, I don't want to have grass at all. So let's change it back. And we got this terrain, for example. So you're completely free with this, and you can actually texture it yourself. And we will cover this in a second. So let's go and explore the first or the other option with our custom terrain. If we go back into geometry nodes, you will see that if we select our first modifier that we just made ourselves, you can now plug this back into here, and you will see now it uses our Voronoi texture, just like this. Pretty cool, huh? And then you can obviously go back and say, nah, I don't want to have a snowy tip. Let's remove the snow. Grass coverage is also a bit weird. And now we got like this, which is like insane. And once again, and during this video, I will cover gradient assets, so you can actually modify this even more. So what else do we have? We have different textures. If you press Shift A, you can open up the search menu again, and you can go to texture. You have different options. Let's use Voronoi is pretty cool, but you can also use a noise texture, which looks like this, which is like the common noise. And then you can also combine it, something like this. And then you get like noise in the Voronoi, or you can introduce Voronoi to the noise texture, and then it will look like this. So completely different options. You can go and change the scale, just like this. You can change the detail over here, and you get more like this terrain, which pretty insane. All right. So the next thing that we're going to do is we will cover how you can create a terrain by using the sculpt mode. So let's go back into layout. Let's remove this. Let's add a new plane. Let's check the size. Yeah, 200 is pretty good. And let's subdivide it once more. And we should go pretty high. And then you can go to the sculpting mode actually. So in sculpting mode, you have access to different brush types. For example, the draw tool, it will basically draw anything onto it. There are tutorials out there which explain how you can use custom brushes. So for example, if you have brushes with white and black textures, you can actually sculpt more detail into it. But I'm not covering this today. And you can use the Shift key to smooth out your terrain. And then you can sculpt your terrain this way. For example, you can use the elastic hook to pull out terrain and make it like in cool shapes. For example, this diamond shape over here, where maybe a meteor crashed in. And you can pull and make it some weird artifacts, something like this. And then you can go back basically into your layout and use this as the base for your texture, terrain modifier, and VoxelVision geometry node modifier, which will then again use exactly the terrain you just modeled, which is pretty cool. And then you can go back and modify it once more. Now we're gonna cover how you can create terrain, how you can modify it with different assets, with rocks, with trees, and how you can export it in the end. So this is a complete walkthrough through a complete terrain on a simple basis. And I will also cover the new settings of the scatter asset and the grass or spawn grass asset type. And we start completely from scratch. So for this terrain, I am scaling up a new plane, just like we did before. Let's use a terrain bar of 300 by 300. The next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going into edit mode. subdivide it even more, something like this. I go into points, point selection. You can do this on the top here as well. And then I'm gonna pull with proportional editing some of those points away, so we can create some nice slopes into our terrain, something like this. So it's not too steep, but it's also not too low. So like an elevation of 25 blocks. All right. So the next thing, pretty easy. Apply our preview color. We apply terrain generator. We do not want any snow, so we can crank this up to 1. We do not need too much grass. We do not need so much displacement. So that's a bit high, so let's make it smaller. Increase it maybe a tiny bit, something like this. And we should be good to go. And I kind of want to have a gradient going from here to here. So let's use the linear gradient, plug it on top of it. And then we need 2 hook objects. And we're going to create them by using empties. So a plane axis over here, scale it up. And a plane axis over here. Let's select both of them. And with M, you can create a new collection. Let's call them hooks. And move them into this collection. So let's use our start hook, which is here, and our end hook, which is over here. And I kind of want a beach on this end, so I'm going to choose a nice yellow color. And then I'm going to use a nice dark color to blend into the green from before. And then we can play with our blend modes to really get the result we are looking for, something like this, and maybe pull down those gradients so we can actually work with it a bit more. Let's introduce a little bit of diagonality, and this looks kind of cool. So I'm happy with this, and once you're happy, you can apply your VoxelVision geometry node modifier, and you can directly see, okay, the gradient was applied and it's ready to use. Let's go into our VoxelVision modifier and let's choose our palette called Disable Terrain, as always, and disable slabs and stairs. And now you can see it uses, well, like concrete over here, so that's a bit of a bummer. Let's use sand. We want to use sand, we want to use sandstone, we want to use smooth sandstone, suspicious sand. Yeah, this is way, way better. And let's introduce some noise because it's a bit too smooth. For example, like this, 0.1. Introduce some detail, maybe 5. And roughness a bit higher. Maybe even strength a bit more. And we could increase on the terrain a bit of the displacement. It's a bit small. Maybe do, yeah, something like this. And then you can still go in, select your hook, obviously save your file, and you can go in and play around with all those different settings so they really blend into your terrain. If you don't like, for example, the wool, I don't really like the wool. Let's remove the light gray wool, the gray wool, the light gray wool. So we get like more of an andesite to cobblestone. Let's remove the andesite as well and the cobblestone. Yeah, so we have like a stony shore that blends into our nice terrain over here. So once you're happy with this, we can go and customize it even further. And I will do this by creating a new asset for our scene. So let's go out of this. Let's call this rocks. So now we introduce some rocks. And we can do this by hiding all of those assets and drag and dropping the simple rock tool. Just like this. And we want to drag the rock into our rocks collection. And then we can modify our rock. So the first thing is obviously to select our simple rock block palette, and let's disable stairs and slabs. Or maybe let's keep stairs, so this looks kind of nice. And then we can modify it. I will remove those rocks over here. I remove actually everything and start from scratch. So let's use our cube and scale our cube, and we got a nice little rock over here. With Ctrl R, you can actually create a loop cut, just like this. So you can then go in and scale your bottom or the top a bit further and move it and squish it just as you want. So this is our rock 1. Let's create a second one. You can duplicate it with Shift D, just like this. You can go into edit mode again, scale, maybe scale the base this time so it's a bit differently shaped. Maybe let's make it a bit thinner. And then we also want to make a third one. Let's make this more of like a disc. Something like this. Looks really cool. And yeah, so now I want to make sure that all of them are maybe roughly on the same height. And I'm gonna apply the scale for all of those, the transforms on all of those. So if we move them back, we can actually see them side by side like this. All right, so this is our rocks. If we go back to our plane, we can now scatter those rocks along this terrain. How are we going to do this? Well, we use our scatter objects asset from the asset library and drag and drop it onto it. Okay, let's close those down, and we got this right over here. Let's choose collection and use our rocks. And you can see all of those rocks are used and scattered everywhere. But everywhere doesn't even make sense, right? So for example, if you want to have the rocks just spawning on like the stony shore because like they are washed onto the beach, right? So let's say they only should appear on clean stone. So let's go into our scattered object mode. There's a mask tool. So let's use this tool. Let's search for stone. It should appear somewhere in this list right here. And then we can enable the mask. And well, now no stone is there at all. So let's increase the density to 1 and hopefully we get some to spawn in. You can also choose the manual mode to increase the probability even more. And now they are like scattered along the coastline, which is really nice. But what if you want to customize it even further? And this is where the new VoxelVision 4.1 update comes in. You have this new button over here where you can plug in a mask directly from the vertex into it. How does it work? Let's go back a couple of steps and let's go onto our terrain. You can go into the properties and then you can see there are vertex groups. Let's create a vertex group. Double click, let's say rocks. And if you then go to object mode, you can see you can change it to weight paint. So let's use the weight paint. You can also open it with Ctrl Tab. Let's go into weight paint and it will use those rocks basically to weight paint onto your terrain. You can actually then paint a mask directly onto your terrain, and this is basically where those rocks should spawn later on. You have different methods. So you can actually say weight 1 to 0. So where the weight is like 0, there's like no chance that a rock will spawn there. And if the weight is 1, there's like the highest chance. You can also change the fall off type. So you also have like constant. So you have like constant stroke instead of like this fall off. But I will keep it with this little fall off right here. All right, so let's say we are happy with this. This is just an example, right? But yeah, maybe I will do it correctly for this purpose. So let's create maybe like a valley of rocks where we can then spawn trees inside of it. That would be cool, right? So let's use constant to make it even special on the outside. And then we have our beach over here. So then you can go with Control Tab back into object mode, and then you can basically turn on all the previous actions. You can go back, 1 second, remember how you called your vertex group. You can go back into your scattered object modifier and click on this icon. The rocks disappear and there's like a field. Unfortunately, due to your Blender internal bug, you cannot see the vertex group that you just created in here. But you can type it in. So let's type in rocks, because this is how you named it actually in this vertex group over here. And now you can see, somehow it only spawned rocks here. That's weird. Maybe if we decrease it? Weird. Why could this happen? Because of our mask. If we disable our mask, it will then fill the entire mask that we had previously selected. So let's use avoid intersection mode. Random rotation would be nice. And you can also invert the selection. So in case you made this, you can now also disable or invert it, but doesn't really make sense, right? And then you can change the seed obviously as well. So I really like this. With the new weight paint mode and vertex groups, you can now actually define where your objects should go. And you can actually go in and change it at any point, because it will automatically pick up from the weight paint or like from the vertex group. So this is really nice, but we can obviously improve it a bit more. So let's go and hide our object for now. And let's bring in our birch trees. Very nice. So birch tree, and let's move this one with M again into a collection called tree. And let's create some variations of this as well. So let's make this maybe 20 blocks in height. Looks also quite good. And let's make a third one, which is maybe just 15 in height, which looks also quite good. Let's change the seed for a better option. Yeah, I like this. All right, this is actually pretty easy. So we can hide our trees again, choose our plane, and once more, we can choose our scatter object mode, asset, and choose our tree selection or tree collection. They're scattered everywhere. So now we actually want to have them everywhere except where the stones are. So now we can actually click on this, choose our rocks as the mask, and now they will spawn everywhere, but we are inverting it. So now, this is pretty cool, right? So now they're spawning everywhere inside of the stones, but also on the beach, which is pretty sad. So let's change this by going in and creating a custom mask. So we don't want to spawn them on suspicious sand, which is over here. So let's use sand, if I could spell it. So it should not be on sand, it should not be on sandstone, and not on suspicious sand. And then if we toggle on the mask, you can see it now only spawns there. And if you click on invert mask, it should only spawn over here. So now you can also say, okay, well, you could have said it should spawn it on moss. So let's do this instead. Moss. Let's remove those entries over here, and then disable invert mask. So now they actually spawn inside of the rocks, but not on the beach, but just on, well, the moss blocks. Let's move them down by 1 block so they're more inserted into the ground. And well, this looks pretty cool actually, right? But we can take it even further, because we have now a new spawn grass mode over here, which is now also in with extended features. So let's drag and drop it onto it. And you can probably see the timings are getting quite high. So let's change this, because we can actually bake our VoxelVision geometry node modifier down, so we actually get some new performance out of it. So it's dropped by 200 milliseconds, which feels a bit smoother at least. So we spawned the grass, which is pretty nice, but well, it's a bit ugly because it is directly on the beach. So let's create a new mask for it as well. Let's say it should only be on the ground, and let's enable the mask. So this is even better. So it's not on the trees anymore, but it also covers our rocks. So, and for example, for the grass, we could do also another mask over here. So if we just change this to rocks as well, you can then see it only paints grass in the rocky areas and not inside of here. And maybe you can see if I disable the spawn variation, it's pretty dense over here and it spars out on the fall off area. So this is actually something we could use to influence the mask or the intensity of our grass. So let's do this actually, right? So let's use another mask. In this case, we will come back to it later. So let's create the mask first. So let's disable everything. Let's go into our vertex paint mode, create a new mask called grass. And then let's jump into weight paint. So if you, for example, paint with a weight of this, it should looks like this. And I just make it for the sake of this example in this pattern so you can actually understand what it does when we have a look at it later. So I'm just cranking it up now. And you will see what it will do to our grass distribution actually. So this looks pretty good. So in theory, it should be none over here and then slowly builds up in this linear pattern. Let's see if this will work. Let's go back, enable all of our modifiers. Actually, let's not enable the scatter so we can actually see it in isolated mode. Let's enable our grass and then choose our grass for our mask. And well, it's actually quite hard to see, but in theory, yeah, you can see it from this angle actually. It's way sparser over here. So this was like weight 0.3, 0.4, and then it goes to completely full over here. So this is a way how you can control it. And it's completely disappearing on the edges because this is where we stopped painting. So now we can introduce the spawn variation as well. So it actually gets a bit better over time. Let's bring in our rocks and our trees again. So actually there actually looks like this now. But wouldn't it be cool to have more options? Yeah, we do. So we have grass, we have normal and dry grass. This is also an addition to the new 4.1 version of VoxelVision, so keep that in mind. With the normal grass, you also have the option to spawn in tall grass. If you don't want that, you can disable it over here. And then you can also say how much tall grass should be spawned. 100%, 100%, 0%. No tall grass, or a distribution of 33%, I think is quite nice. Okay, then you have flowers. You can also spawn in flowers, and these flowers will all actually try to match the terrain color as best as possible. So you can see you get white flowers more to the whiter areas, and then it goes into the purple. It also drops in some sunflowers, which is pretty nice. Yeah, so then you can override, for the flowers you can override the color because not everyone wants the same color. So you can actually override the color and choose a color that you like. Then you also have the fern, which places down fern. And I split it up in this way so you can actually stack multiple grass modifiers on top of it to pretty much define where which one should go. Let's use our grass for this mode. And then let's actually add another grass modifier on top of it. But this time we want dry grass. And let's try to only make the dry grass appear in the stony shore so we get a nice gradient basically. How can we do this? Let's go into our spawn mask and say we want to have it spawn on mossy cobblestone, on mossy stone bricks, and andesite. So let's search for andesite. And then we can turn it on actually. And then it should be only over here. Oh, and I forgot clean stone. Let's pick clean stone as well. stone. So just like this. And you get a really nice stony shore in a pretty low amount of time. Obviously, if you have a nice concept in mind, you should actually make your vision, and I'm just trying to make an example out of everything that's new. Yeah. Okay, so with this we can actually have fun. So you can try a few different things. Maybe we can even do one more spawn grass on top of it. And let's use flowers. Let's use our grass mask and invert the selection. So now we only get flowers in the outside barrier. And then we say it only should spawn on moss blocks, because that's reasonable, right? Moss blocks, enable the mask. And yeah, this looks pretty good actually. So we got flowers on top of these, Yeah, why not? On this border as well. And it actually extends a little bit inwards as well, which is interesting. Because it inverts it, yeah. And we had 0 on the outside, but we still had like not completely 1 on the inside. So we actually get some flowers in the middle, but not on the full extent, like on this side where it was completely 1. So this is now a better visualization of the gradient, because here you get flowers, on this side not, because we had the grass from 0 to 1, and now we inverted it, so 1 to 0. Let's try and export this. This looks pretty damn cool. We can go in and export it actually to, well, Minecraft. If we go into Axiom, you can actually see our tutorial terrain example is right here, and we can drag and drop it and paste it in. Let's do something like this, maybe something like this. Let's not paste air because it will destroy the terrain underneath. And let's paste it. And yeah, that's pretty much it. We have it right here inside of Minecraft. Our suspicious sand is over here. We got our terrain. It's actually huge. So it's like 300 by 300. We got our nice gradient from grass to dry grass. Our cobblestone blending right into our terrain with our beautiful flowers, our trees with random rotation, so it actually doesn't look like every tree is the same. You can also see we got our flowers on the left and right side. You can see our rocks just on the outside as well. And yeah, this looks actually just like in Blender. I hope you like the new features of VoxelVision 4.1. That's it for this tutorial. I hope you learned a lot. If you have like other questions, let's see, we have a sunflower. Anyways, if you enjoyed this video, please subscribe, please like, and I hope to catch you soon. See you.